conservatives and libertarian students here at Swarthmore College, all four of us. So it's a welcome. It's a pleasure to have Petersen here. He is a constitutional libertarian who believes in economic freedom and personal liberty. His passion for limited government led him to a job at the Libertarian National Committee in 2008, and then eventually to the Atlas Economic Research Foundation. After fighting for liberty in our nation's capital, Mr. Petersen took a job as an associate producer for Judge Andrew Napolitano's show Freedom Watch on the Fox Business Network. After that, he returned to DC to work for the Tea Party institution Freedom Works, and subsequently started his own business venture, Stonegate LLC, as well as a popular national news magazine, The Libertarian Republic, and viral content site, Liberty Viral. And then he also ran for the Libertarian nomination for president in 2016.
There was that.
So
yeah.
There was that.
Yeah.
All right. Please join me in welcoming Austin Petersen.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Gilbert. Thank you, Jorge. Thank you, Conservative Club, for bringing me out here to Swarthmore. You guys are fantastic. And let me just say how grateful I am to have this opportunity because, you know, I have a good buddy, Adam Puff, back there. He's having a little trouble. Thanks, Adam, for coming. Yeah, the creepy guy in the back. But it's an honor for someone like myself to get to a position in life where they're invited to come and speak. One of the things that I've been really going over in my head recently and trying to sort of formulate some thoughts to put into words, it's been very difficult for me to articulate. Usually I'm pretty chatty and I can talk about things. But one of the most difficult things that I've been pondering over, and it's something that I think maybe libertarians and conservatives may struggle with, is the question of whether or not there is a bit of a class or a caste system in the United States. And I used to say, no, it's a classless society, et cetera, no, but I really think there is, and I learned that during my presidential run, because you know, most of the criticisms that were leveled at me, you know, never been a governor, right, no elective office before, but there was something that I noticed that about a distaste in the United States now for people who, you might call me a plebe, right, not a patrician, somebody who grew up on a farm, someone who comes from very humble beginnings, somebody who didn't major in economics or in political science, perhaps. But I think it stands testament, maybe to the opposite argument, that someone like myself, with my very humble background, is being invited to come and speak to colleges such as yourself. So I just want to say thank you for helping to fulfill an American dream. Because this is going to be a really interesting talk tonight about my American dream, why he is my candidacy. I want to give the things that I think it's important to understand my thought processes, my things, ideas, perspectives. Is the Libertarian Republic. 3 years ago, I had a coup while I was there. The president and the vice president terrified the rest of us. And I was like, oh my God, at any point in time, and I had just, been not fired, but laid off from Fox because they canceled the show and let the whole staff go, et cetera, et cetera. So I was kind of terrified, and I thought to myself, if these guys can run a multi-million-dollar institution, how to make small ideas, the ideas that were really small and not very well accepted, how to make them huge, right? Donald Trump is perfect Fox News fodder, right? So I thought, well, if I can take the knowledge that I had of libertarianism that I'd spent years building and growing and as an activist, and then I take my Fox News and Fox Business credentials and I can compact them into a website, maybe libertarianism can go a little more mainstream. Right now, the Libertarian Republic is one of the most popular libertarian news magazines in the world, and we don't get outside funding we're not a nonprofit like Reason Magazine or something like that. They're getting millions of dollars from the Koch brothers. The Libertarian Republic operates on a for-profit basis, like we say we believe in, and it creates jobs. And that's part of the victory, I think, is to say that libertarian ideas can succeed on their own in the free market. And so that's why I created Libertarian Republic and Liberty Viral. Now, after my presidential campaign ended, I started the Stonegate Institute, which is a small nonprofit, as a way to do political activism that I think we as libertarians, we sometimes eschew, because everybody loves to get involved with the big picture stuff, right? The federal issues, run for president. But not a lot of people like to get involved with local activism. So I started this nonprofit, and we've been involved in 3 different cases right now. We've got 1 victory under our belts, 1 loss. But what we do is we fight. We're basically Ghostbusters for liberty, right? You call us up, and the activists that I gathered during my campaign, we go to the town council, and we either support the legislation or we try and knock it down. And our victory was that in Florida, one of our activists went out and they were trying to block medical marijuana from being implemented in a township. So our activists showed up, registered a disapproval, and just because you show up sometimes, you win. And so we got a victory. Now, a few weeks ago, we were in Mount Airy, Maryland, where a federal firearms license dealer who operates out of his home, he sells historic firearms out of his home, he was being persecuted by the soccer moms, the anti-gun soccer moms of his hometown. And they were all there standing up crying about the kids and the children and, about how awful and evil these guns were and the firearms were in our homes and stuff. This is a family man. He's got 3 kids, a wife of his own. And all he wanted to do was be able to transfer and sell historic firearms out of his home. And so I thought that was worthy of getting involved in. And we didn't win that struggle, but they would have had nobody there if Stonegate hadn't shown up to fight. And we did. And that's going to be litigated, and so that fight isn't quite over yet. But that's what the Stonegate Institute does, right? Freedom fighters. And so far, so good. On the back side of that, we've got a little thing called a super PAC, which some of you might be familiar with. We don't talk about it a little too long. It's dark money, like the Democrats like to say. But it's called Loki PAC, dedicated to electoral mischief. And I think libertarians need to start more super PACs for more electoral mischief, because Citizens United, as we know, was, I think, a gift to people like ourselves, the plebes, right? For people like us, so that if we find one millionaire, or if my dad, or your cousin, or somebody who's rich, wants to fund your political activism and your free speech, they should do so. So Loki PAC is a new super PAC that is dedicated to, creating trouble for the establishment. And we've had 2 projects that we've worked on so far. One was that we raised $10,000 to do a commercial for Gary last year, Gary Johnson. That went well. We didn't win, but it was a good opportunity to kind of learn the space. And the second thing we did was we started a troll petition to ask Richard Spencer to take a blood test to confirm his Whitey McWhiteness. Because he did take one before, but he didn't release the last 5% of his DNA. We just wanted to see, because it started to look a little Jewish towards the end. Yeah. So Loki PAC started a poll to get a petition to get people to come out to find out whether or not the guy who is not a fan of darkies to see if maybe he's got a little inside of him, right? We all do. God, Anyways, we'll talk about the alt-right. We'll talk about the alt-right. We'll talk about all that, the dark stuff, the scary stuff, the Nazis, the communists. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But before we do, I want to tell you, just to demonstrate to you the sincerity and the depth of these principles, how deeply embedded these principles are to me. I want to tell you a quick little story. So not today's flight to Detroit, right, where I was coming here, but maybe 6 weeks ago, I was on a flight to Detroit. Everybody who's kind of familiar with Ayn Rand, right? Maybe you know a few Ayn Rand quotes. I think you're going to like this then. So I'm on a flight to Detroit, and it's Spirit, because I'm being fiscally conservative. And so we're all kind of packed in the back of the airplane. And the flight attendants, everybody wants to move, right? But the flight attendants are like, okay, just wait until we're up in the air. Wait until we're up in the air, and then you can move your seats. And there's a big, juicy exit row. And it's totally open. And I'm up against the window, and so we get ready to start. Then I'm going to have to bug them to get up, and it's going to be a nightmare. And all I wanted was to just get to the exit row. And the flight attendant's like, all right, just everybody stay where you're at, all right. And once we get up in the air, then you can move, right? Once we get up in the air and level out, you can move, right? So the seatbelt signs are on. So we get up in the air, right? 2 people start going to sleep, and the seatbelt signs are still on, but we level out, right? So the rules are starting to get a little hazy. So I stand up, and I'm getting ready to go to the exit row before the seatbelt sign is turned off, right? And the lady who's on the end is like, I don't think the stewardesses are going to let you do that. And I just looked at her and I go, well, the question isn't who's going to let me. The question is who's going to stop me. So that was my Ayn Rand moment there. So yeah. Can I say something that's going to sound really strange at first blush? I'm really glad that I lost. Not because I didn't want to be the candidate. I did want to be the candidate. I thought I would have been the better candidate, the better man. I'm glad I lost because it means that I tried. And I think there's a lesson there because from defeats, okay, effort to do something incredible that no old man running for president. I'm glad I lost not because I didn't want to be the candidate. I absolutely wanted to be the candidate. I think I would have been a great candidate. But I'm glad I lost because it's a small little club that I'm in now, and I've done something amazing, and I still have the rest of my life ahead of me. Right? So that's a personal thing. But the reason why I'm glad that I did it is because I've got an army of freedom ninjas out there who are now activated, energized, motivated. They're now involved. Right? I knew that my chances were slim. Right? Chances are zero if you don't try. But I'm glad I did it because now the Stonegate Institute exists. Loki PAC exists. The Libertarian Republic is more powerful than ever. More people are now getting involved in libertarianism because they're like, Austin, you inspired me. You got me involved. And I knew, here's the thing. A lot of people run for office, and we were talking about this earlier during dinner. A lot of people run for office telling people exactly what they want to hear, never contradicting their biases, right? And they do that because they want to win, right? I want to win too. But the problem is that if you run for office and you just tell people what they want to hear, and you don't offer them new information or try and motivate them to think outside the box and try and consider a new policy that might be scary at first, well, then if you lose and you didn't do that, well, then you wasted your time. So I didn't waste my time because the whole time while I was running for president, I was campaigning, I was out talking about ideas. It wasn't just those bumper sticker phrases that everybody accused me of, right? Like, yes, I did say that I believe I want to live in a world where gay married couples can defend their marijuana fields with fully automatic machine guns. But the critics, most of the critics, right, have never been in a presidential debate where you have 30 seconds to rebut where's Aleppo guy. So don't knock it till you tried it. And therein lies the rub. One of the big, I think that 2016 was a setback for libertarians. Most of the people, the establishment of my party don't believe that. They see it as an incredible win because it was 3%, right, higher than we've ever gotten in our lives. But now, what do people think libertarians are, right? We as libertarians, we struggle to define what libertarian is, what it means to be a libertarian, even amongst ourselves. Like, you know, a large portion of the libertarian movement does not think that I'm a libertarian because I believe in roads. No, I'm kidding. I do believe in roads, but private roads. Just kidding. No, well, you know, if you're not an anarchist, you're a statist, essentially, right? Is this concept. But what I don't like about what happened last year is the fact that people think, oh, well, libertarian means being fiscally conservative and socially liberal. Because that's how Gary described it. But that's just not true. It's not true. I like to make the joke, well, it means being fiscally conservative and socially whatever you want, just don't force it down my throat. Essentially, the concept is you can be a social conservative. You know, you can be a conservative Christian and who believes in fiscal conservatism and live a completely pure, chaste life. But as long as you don't want to force everyone else to live according to that lifestyle, then you're a libertarian. So that's what libertarianism is. Libertarianism is essentially the great compromise amongst us all. The true idea of live and let live. You do what you want as long as you harm no one else. That's really what libertarianism is. So it's not socially conservative, it's not socially liberal, it's your money, your problems, right? Your lifestyle, your problems, right? And if I choose to be charitable towards you in your economic life, then I choose to. If I choose to help you with your health care, I choose to do that. You know, that you're not libertarian. It's just not true. As a matter of fact, you know, I have a group online that we affectionately call ourselves the Freedom Ninja Army. And in that group, somebody took a poll the other day of the religions of the people that were there. So probably more secular people on average than like the percentage of the population. But Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, Wiccans, people from so many different varied backgrounds of religious beliefs, that the liberty message to me is it could be so much more powerful than it is right now. Because I think we have limited ourselves in many ways to being a small in-group, right? We have a sort of cultish mentality, I think, sometimes we as libertarians. I know many of you are conservatives. When I say we, I'm talking about, of course, libertarians. But it's a very much a get out. It's like that meme. It's like, I'm not listening, right? And because we can't even define it amongst ourselves. We can't even have a truce amongst ourselves. Every disagreement in libertarianism is a bloody civil war, right? And that's where we really struggle. Now, I think I was pretty damn good at spreading libertarian ideas, and the reason why I think I was probably more successful than some people in spreading ideas rather than maybe being successful electorally, which I wasn't, but in shaping people's opinions, the one thing that I learned that was a very positive lesson for me, and which I think most politicians could probably learn a thing from too, is how to shut up. In terms of just the actual electoral game of politics, there's a difference between principles and tactics. Don't confuse them, because tactics can be divorced of principles. And sometimes you have to do things tactically that maybe ends justifying the means is the big question there. But in terms of spreading libertarianism, I found that from an electoral perspective, this is hilarious. So when I would talk to people, I would meet people, they would introduce me, they would say, "This is Austin, he's running for president of the United States." Like, "Who?" Like, "Okay, kid, nice to meet you." But then what I found was that I would ask people a question and say, "What issues do you care about? Right? What's going on in your hometown, in your state, your city? What's really bothering you, or what's really the problems that you see with government?" And people would just go on and on and on and on and on, right? And then if I even chose to respond, which a lot of times I didn't even have to respond, a lot of times people would just talk, and at the end they would go, "Thanks for listening. You got my vote." Yeah. It could be that easy. I was blown away. I was like, wow, this is so, all I got to do to win an election is just shut up and let people talk? Yeah, sometimes. But if you're interested in inserting ideas in there, injecting concepts and new, maybe scary ideas, then once you've listened, once you hear what people's problems are, rather than bashing them over the head with the NAP and non-aggression and cut this and cut that, rather than force feeding our ideas to the American public, you find the libertarian in everyone. Everybody is a libertarian about something. Like, unless you're just a full-blown commie, in which case, we're probably going to go to war, right? I hate commies. To be fair, I hate Nazis too, so... But everyone is a libertarian about something. So, if I ask you, what issues do you care about? Well, what are your thoughts on government? They may be like statist, and then, but I think weed should be legalized. Or statist, I think that we should cut taxes. Something like that, right? Somewhere inside everyone is this opportunity for us, free marketers, limited government types, conservatives, libertarians, is an opportunity for us to advance our cause by being better listeners and finding the libertarian in everyone by shutting up. Because we're kind of autistic libertarians, right? They say libertarianism actually causes autism. There's been a study. You can find it on Reason Magazine. This is not a joke. It's true, right? We tend to be a bit manic, like Liberty. It's like we've got. There's a little something wrong with us, and politics is a social art. Politics is a social activity, right? And so, if you want to win the game, you've got to play the game. If you want to play the game, you're going to need to build relationships, right? You cannot win alone. You cannot take your ideas out there and be one man on an island. You will get crushed, right? Individualists who must practice collectivism, essentially, right? If we're taking democratic action, otherwise we could maybe find 50 or 60 guys and go start a rebellion, right? But we're not there. If we want to win the war of ideas, then finding that little thread in the sweater, the little loose thread, and just pulling it. But again, like I said, we're a little manic, and we want to get aggressive, right? It's so funny. It's so aggressive, these non-aggressionists, right? Whenever you disagree with someone who practices non-aggression, they get very aggressive. I actually was almost assaulted once by a non-aggressionist. I mean, I guess it makes sense if I am, if I'm they call me a commie. But I was like, okay, well, I guess it makes sense, right? This is how we get the whole helicopter ride concept that's going around, right? Give them a helicopter ride, because if your philosophy ultimately leads to violence. I'm getting really weird here, guys. All right, let's get back on track. Let's talk about current affairs. Yes. Defeated Obamacare Light. Yeah. Good news. You're all now on Trump's enemy list. Every single one of you who we're gonna come after you bigly, right? You're all in big trouble now. Apparently. And what's amazing is that so many of those Freedom Caucus members, look what they get for their support of Trump. Look what they get for standing up for their principles. They're now on the enemies list. Okay.
Very quick, I'm surprised that Trump did not take aim at the Republican Tuesday group, which was a group of moderates that also voted against it.
Okay, yes, but it's easy to pin the blame on the radicals. Okay, remember did anybody see the movie Lincoln? Right? Does everybody remember the radical Republicans from history? It's only a small group of people that ever change things. That's why when people are like, well, how are we going to get mass, our ideas out there to the masses and have everybody accept us? Sometimes even in elections, you don't even need 50% to win. You can win elections sometimes by 30%, right? And the radical Republicans, who were the agitators in Congress, were the ones who managed to pass the 13th Amendment, with Lincoln's help, of course. But it was the moderates that didn't want it, right? And now we have, again, history repeating itself. I'm not saying Obamacare is slavery, but I will say this. I think that it is tyrannical, the redistribution of wealth, for no matter what noble purpose you have. I believe that is absolutely tyrannical. And I think it's also, just from an economic standpoint, completely inefficient. But we can debate the ins and outs of Obamacare later. But in terms of what's happening right now, with Trump attacking the House Freedom Caucus, this just goes to show what Trump comes from. Trump is not an ideologue. Okay, I consider myself very much an ideologue. Right, I hew to a standard set of principles. I'm not dogmatic, and I despise orthodoxy. But I do consider myself much more an ideologue. Now, Trump is he's the proverbial bull in the china shop. So when he doesn't get what he wants, he's going to, throw a fit and have a white riot, right? He's going to pitch a fit, and he's going to act like a spoiled baby in many ways, and until he gets what he wants. And so if anybody who stands in his way is the problem. Now, I feel like when he tweeted that out and said that the House Freedom Caucus and the Democrats are going to have to face a challenge in 2018, I felt like the only reason why he put the Democrats in there is because he needed to for partisan effect. Otherwise, if he had just gone after his own people like that, then there would have been more of a backlash. But I am heartened by the fact that if you go and you check the comments on Trump's Facebook page today, even his own people who will stand up for him for anything, grab her by the you-know-what, and they don't care. But it's amazing that people are these are the indicators where people you see are starting to wake up. And quite frankly, we should have passed Rand Paul's bill if we really wanted to do something good for our country. We should have never passed Obamacare at all. But, we don't live in a perfect world, and this isn't utopia. But I think the Freedom Caucus needs help. I think they're going to need as much help as they can get. And if any of you guys are old enough, wise enough, smart enough, talented enough, brave enough, stupid enough to run for office, I would encourage you to do so, because that is one way, very, very important way, that we can make a change. It's not the only way, but running for office can make a powerful statement. And it's going to be we're going to need it, because in 2018, if they are primarying these House Freedom Caucus members, I saw that David Koch stated that he was starting a fund to back them. So the Koch brothers are they're modern heroes. And I think we should absolutely support them in their cause to back up the House Freedom Caucus. All right, now let's talk about foreign policy for a moment. Let's talk about foreign policy, because I want to characterize it in terms of Republicans and Democrats. Because the funny thing is and this is probably going to make some people in this room angry, but you know how Republicans are always like, Second Amendment, like, got my guns, man, like, I got AR-15, don't tread on me, like showing off, they're always stomping around in their Timberlands, and it's like, oh, we're so tough in our jeans and our denim jackets, right? But then, oh my God, the Muslims are going to kill me. Oh my God, I'm terrified. So pick one. Are you guys, are we like badass Second Amendment toting individualists, or are we a bunch of scared of Muslims sleeping under our beds, terrified weenies? Because you can't have it both ways. You're getting it both ways, but I'm going to call you out on it, Republicans, because the truth is that the reason why the United States doesn't have a lot of the same problems that Europe has is because we have guns. It's true. It's because three teenagers, were shot down in a home invasion last week because they walked in, tried to rob the place. The kid had his AR-15 and he blew him away. That's what you do, America. You don't worry about Muslim threats because you know that America is safe, not because of our foreign policy, because I think our foreign policy is making us less safe, to be quite honest. America is safe because we got guns, because we are a hardy, individualist nation, because we know how to take care of one another. Because if my neighbor is in trouble, I got no problem getting a shotgun and going and seeing what's right. That's what's great about America, is we were always willing to help one another and to defend one another. But I absolutely despise the politicians and the partisans who are trying to terrify us and fearmonger us and tell us and hype threats that are either, if they're existent, they're minuscule, because quite frankly, you are much more likely to drown in your bathtub than to die in a terrorist attack. But that doesn't get votes. Because if I wanted to get votes, if I was a real politician, I'd get up here and say, those Muslims, we got to stop them at the border, and we've got to build a wall because they're going to take your jobs. You know why? Because fear is a much more powerful emotion than love. Machiavelli knew this. That's why he said it was much better to be feared than loved. You know why? Because if I stood up here and I scared you all to death, it'd be a lot better than if I made you all love me. Because if you may love me today, but then you may hate me next week. Love is a fickle emotion. Fear is not. Fear is a powerful emotion that is embedded in our lizard brains. Love is, it is. Love, fight or flight. These are politicians play on our basest emotions. They play on our lizard brains. They use sex and they use, sex scandals. Politicians, unless it's Anthony Weiner, tend to love a good sex scandal. If they're not married or something like that, because you can turn it around. And, in D.C. you fail up, right? People in D.C. aren't chastised. They fail, and then Anthony Weiner was in trouble because he was threatening the Clinton dynasty, and that's But for the most politicians and people in D.C., you probably don't know who this is. Benny Johnson, journalist, plagiarism, right? Then he gets upgraded to Review, right? And then National Review, right? And each one practices, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because in Washington, D.C., it's the only place where you can fail. But fear, it's so much more powerful. But hypocrisy, because, again, with the Republicans, it's always the hiding behind the Second Amendment, and then we're all such badasses. And then, meanwhile, we're all terrified of threats, that are probably never going to happen to us. And remember, it was the government that didn't keep us safe on 9/11 anyway. So the fact that we stepped up their enforcement mechanisms and created a horrible Transportation Security Agency, created a horrible Department of Homeland Security. I think multiple layers of redundancy is what is creating the problem, because there's no accountability. There's no accountability. But the fear of 9/11 has resulted in an expansionist government that has put us nearly $20 trillion in the hole. Do you feel safer now than you did? You guys are mostly kids. Well, you're like, some of you were like born when 9/11 happened. I feel old. But talking about fear-mongering, it's not just the Republicans. The Democrats do it too. Climate change. Oh, man. It's going to get you. It's going to get you 2 degrees warmer. And the funny thing is, I mean, without debating the science too much, ice ages, millions of years of climate change happening in the United States, but all of a sudden the carbon dioxide that is essential for life on this planet, all plants take carbon dioxide. It's now the biggest thing that we have to fear. Cow farts, essentially, right? We regulate this, right? In Europe, they regulate cow methane, right? How many cows you have, how much they fart, and then we write you a bill, right? Carbon credits is what they push, right? Because sending money to politicians in Washington is probably going to offset climate change. Leonardo DiCaprio, flying around in a jet that burns thousands of gallons of jet fuel. But you plebes, you need to ride the bus, right? They're hypocrites. Limousine liberals. Mercedes Marxists. Right? But they want to fearmonger too, right? Bill Nye. Bill Nye's a butt chunk. This is a guy... and let me tell you what. This is a guy who, if you are skeptical of their theories, and why would you be skeptical, right? But if you're skeptical, he said that you should be jailed. Screw you, Bill Nye. They call themselves Antifa, anti-fascists. No, they're fascists. That's fascist.
Jacobins.
The Jacobins, yes. And they are fearmongers because they threaten and they bully and they cajole. We'll get to questions at the end. And they want, because they know if you're afraid that they can get you to take an action. They can get you to do something. Don't buy it. Do not give in to fear. There are reasonable reasons to have fears, okay? Fear is a natural emotion. It is something that we all fear. But what I am afraid of is that we are being played. We are being played by people who want to use us and who want to use the destructive power of government for their own selfish ends, right? So beware the fearmongers, and don't let anybody change your behavior out of fear. Fear sells, fear earns votes. Let's talk about religious liberty. I'm not a religious man. I was a religious man. People who love me, the people who are like the political handlers that have started circling in the last couple of years, they keep telling me, Austin, stop talking about this. But I'm afraid that if I don't talk about this, that nothing will ever change. And in this discussion lies one of the most beautiful, amazing, incredible things that happened during my presidential campaign, which is an unfinished job that I feel I've got. And if anybody ever felt like they had purpose in life, I feel like part of this topic especially is definitely part of my purpose. Let's talk about it. Bake the cake. Bake the damn cake, right? Bake the cake. For those of you who are unfamiliar, there was a Christian baking company. There was a Christian florist. And they are being persecuted by leftists who want to use the government to force them to provide services for their gay weddings. Now, like I said earlier, I want to live in a world where gay married couples can defend their marijuana fields with assault rifles. But I also believe in this thing called freedom of association. And I believe in this thing called religious liberty, where you are free to practice or not to practice. And this question, the question of freedom of association and religious liberty, is one that, devoid of context, gets libertarians and conservatives in big trouble. Because without context, without the racial history involved, without an understanding of the civil rights movement of the 1960s, the policies of LBJ, that which John F. Kennedy began, which LBJ finished, which we are now seeing brought into a modern context to involve religion, without context, we're in big trouble. Because the liberals and the social democrats have the moral high ground, you racist, bigoted, whatever they want to call you. Why? Why? Well, because no matter how loud and proud you are for gay rights, as I definitely am, right, from a personal philosophical conviction period, I'm happy whenever anybody finds love. When I was producing at Fox, I had an executive producer who would like to tease me about the gay marriage stuff, because the Obergefell decision, the Supreme Court decision which made it illegal, it was handed down. And I think he was kind of social conservative, so he's kind of annoyed, right? And the libertarians on the team were all like, yeah, this is great, gay marriage, you can get married, whatever. And he's like, yeah, Austin, so, next you can marry a goat. And then he goes, and maybe you can marry a chair. And I go, if the chair can sign the contract. Everybody was like, oh, heard. You didn't want to mess with this guy. He was pretty tough. Yeah, I do believe in private contracts between consenting adults should be legal, that the government has no prevailing reason to involve itself in marriage between consenting adults. But today, because of problems that we had in the 1960s and before, roots in the Civil War, to the Civil Rights era, to the modern time, because of the problems that we've had with the racial animus in the United States, we now, legally, are required to bake the cake, right? So next, if you're a Muslim, you'll be forced to serve pork, right? If you're a Jew, you'll be forced to serve lobster, right? And here's the rub. So in the debate, Gary Johnson and I are having an argument over the question of whether or not a Christian should be forced to bake a wedding cake for a gay ceremony, right? Whether they should be required to do so, even though it goes against their religious convictions. And Governor Johnson and I had argued about this in a debate before, and so I said to Gary in the debate, do you think that if what you say is true, and he said, yes, I think the Christians should be forced to bake the wedding cake. It was quite clear that he did not like social conservatives, right? He's a social liberal, right? I'm a social liberal as well, but I like social conservatives, and I also want to try and build a movement here. I'm not just doing something selfishly. I'm trying to do something to build a movement of people with different opinions around these concepts. And Gary says, yes, I want to force the Christians to bake the cake. So I was feeling a little salty. So I said, would you force a Jew to bake a cake for a Nazi wedding? And he said, that's my contention, yes. And I was like, oh, bro, you just stepped in it. And sure enough, we're in California the next day. His top donor is a Jewish guy, and I hear him screaming at him from the other side of the door, and I'm like, oh, Gary. I laid a bear trap for you, and you stepped right in it, pal. Because, of course, and people say false equivalency, right? But, take your philosophy and bring it to its own moral ends. And if you do, at some point you must be a bigot, according to leftist dogma. Because the question, of course, is, and Gary and I debated this later in Las Vegas, where it came up again, states have been passing these religious freedom laws, right? They're called RFRAs, right? And I think they've been passed in about 24 states, and it's been passed federally. And the religious freedom laws, what they do is they make it so that you can use religion, or freedom of conscience, as an excuse to just deny services if it goes against your religious freedom. The federal government passed it, but it only applies to the federal government, right? And it was pushed by that old bigot Chuck Schumer and signed by that homophobe Bill Clinton, right? The Democrats don't like to talk about that because now they like having the sharp cudgel to use against the Republicans to claim that they're all bigots because they think that the Christians should have the right of freedom of association in their own business, which they absolutely should have. Now, I got in trouble. I get in trouble all the time. But I got in trouble because I said, just because I think that you shouldn't be forced to bake the cake doesn't mean I think you should shouldn't bake the cake. I mean, I think you should bake the cake, as a matter of fact. As a matter of fact, my values are that if you were spreading hatred in my hometown and you weren't doing this and you were saying, oh, citing religious allegiance, I might say I'm going to boycott. Or I'm going to stand outside and picket. And that's when the social conservatives turned on me. Because they realized that I didn't share their values in that sense. Right? And because some social conservatives are so strict in their sense that they're like, well, we don't like you, Austin, because you don't share our values. But liberty means that I don't have to share your values. It means that you can have your values, and I can disagree with you. And you could do as you like, provided you harm no one else. Not baking a cake for somebody provides no harm. It harms no one. Now, we all got that out of the way. Let's go back to 1964. In 1964, Lyndon Baines Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which contained many provisions, many of them good. As a matter of fact, the majority of the provisions in the 1964 Civil Rights Act are good provisions because they blocked things like Jim Crow, because they led to the end of segregation, right? State-mandated segregation. However, and this is what got Rand Paul in big trouble the day after he won his Senate seat, in which everybody tells me to stop talking about, but the question of Title II in the Civil Rights Bill is whether or not people on a private business should be required to serve. So, should blacks be able to sit at lunch counters if that lunch counter is a private business? You can't say, on one hand, well, you can, but you have to use some twisted logic that, oh, Christians should, of course Christians shouldn't be able to do it because it's a religious freedom. Because what you're really saying, in essence, which is perfectly politically correct, and don't ever, it's very hard to say, but can I ask you a question? I mean, do racists have rights too? Do they?
Yes.
If you go out and walk out of this room, right, and you go out and you ask anybody this question, say, do you think the government should be involved in making racism illegal? I'll bet you 7 or 8 times out of 10, they'll say, yeah. Yes. Those people think that it is the role of government to reform us and to make us into better people, right? This is a very old American style. This is the Puritan tactics, right? This is the purge mentality that we have in the United States. And there is a Puritan left and there is a Puritan right. But both sides of the Puritan left and right have the same solutions. More government to solve the problem. And libertarians in the middle being like, I saw a cartoon the other day, it was really good. It showed a rich man and a poor man, and they're yelling at each other. One side says, you need to stop abusing the system. And the other side says, you need to stop abusing the system. And the libertarian says, why don't we just get rid of the most abused parts of the system? And then the rich guy and the poor guy all kick the crap out of the libertarian. Of course. Because the Puritan left and the Puritan right, they want to abuse the system for their self, for their people. Right? That's what it is. So the Social Democrats are going to use the 1964 Civil Rights Act as a bludgeon against Christians because many of them are rabid atheists who want to destroy religion in public life and who want to use the government to stamp it out. As someone who agrees with them about the origins of the universe, I find this distasteful. I find this disheartening. I despise this approach because I, as a libertarian, believe in liberty, in live and let live, right? And that's the kind of America I want to live in. So the bake the cake issue is not cut and dry, and it's not simple. And I would warn you that before you go out in public and start talking about this issue, get read up on the 1960s. Get read up on the history of racism in the United States. Get read up on the questions of civil rights, question of religious liberty, of freedom of association. Read up on Brown versus the Board of Education, right? Understand the context of history. Because without context in history, if you're a hardcore libertarian and you just are like, I'm only principles and dogma, without an understanding of the context of the history of which these laws operate, we will fail to advance our common cause. Okay? All right. So, so you don't have to bake the cake, at least in my world. But I do get to say, that's not very nice. You should bake the cake. All right, next stuff. All right, so final topic, and then we can do questions, which you guys really enjoyed, and I love. And I have some questions for you guys. Favorite moments of the Libertarian Party presidential campaign. So I was in a debate in North Carolina, and it's a virtual debate, so we're all online. And it's funny because John McAfee is like the tech guy, right? But for some reason, he had instead of his video didn't work, so it was a picture of him, and his profile pic was him with a gun to his head. So we're in a freaking presidential debate, and John McAfee is like, whenever he talks, like, it's for president, and he's got the gun, and he's got his finger on the trigger, and it's like, nah, John, and like, so I'm a little spicy, and I like to mix it up, and I took a poke at McAfee and Johnson, and Gary was the owner of a cannabis company, right? And McAfee, had publicly stated that he had sold drugs at some point in the time. So I go, do you really think that the American people are going to vote to elect drug dealers? And Gary's like, bleh, bleh, bleh. And McAfee, cool as cucumber, is like, Austin, you will come to my compound in Tennessee. You will take 2 hits of acid with me. and it will change your life. And I'm like, I can't believe that I just got invited to do acid in the presidential debate. The conservatives don't like that stuff, but I think it's funny, and I mean, what are you going to do?
Was that before or after that striptease?
It was before the striptease. That wasn't the worst thing that happened at that convention. Okay, so another one of my favorite moments. So I majored in musical theater, right? And when I started the campaign, I was really struggling to raise enough money using technology, live streams, and all this stuff. And one of the questions, of course, that they asked me in Georgia was, how are you going to raise enough money to run a national campaign? And I had no idea, right? I was just doing the best I could. I thought that if I won the nomination, that I would raise millions, which of course I would have, right? Because the opportunity was there, but I had to get there. So I just got up there and I started, I don't have much money, but boy, if I did, I'd buy a big house where we both could live. And they just went crazy. They're like, yeah. And I was like, that's how you BS to an answer. If I didn't have a good answer for that, every once in a while you got to be able to pull out a politician's tactic. But the best part about it was that Judge Jim Gray, who was standing in for Gary at the time, went up to do his piece, and then he goes, I hope you don't mind. And then he finished the whole thing, and it was absolutely brilliant. And I was like, yeah, Elton John for the win. So everybody was happy, and neither one of us had to answer the question. Everybody won. Okay, so one of my favorite ones is I got booed for saying that you shouldn't be able to sell heroin to 5-year-olds. Okay. True story. So we're in the final presidential debate, and it was just dumb. The last debate was horrible. They're like, they would ask questions like, and I had no problem answering them. One of the questions was like, do you think the United States should have been involved in World War II? Like, yeah, we were attacked. And they're like, but then they would follow up and say, do you think the United States should have been involved in World War I? And I'm like, what the hell does this have to do with anything? Like, it was like a setup to make us look stupid before. But then they asked the question of, do you believe that heroin should be allowed to be sold to underage children? I'm like, no, I don't think you should be able to sell heroin to 5-year-olds. And the libertarians are like, boo! And I'm like, I mean, you status cause you anus. I mean, I don't care. Like, at some point, like, before the age of consent, you can't buy heroin. But afterwards. Anybody know anything about the pyramids joke? Raise your hand if you know it. If it's a minority, okay, then we're not talking about it. All right, afterwards. All right. Winning over a conservative on the immigration. Okay. Probably one of my favorite things. I didn't finish earlier on the cake issue. Like, what I saw was my purpose, and the purpose was that when Ted Cruz dropped out, when Rubio dropped out, when all the options had dropped out, and I was the last man standing as the conservative, or at least the constitutionalist, the last constitutionalist standing. Christians said, "I know you don't share my faith, but I would vote for you," and that was revolutionary. because I grew up in a world where Christians and religious people had said they would never vote for someone if they didn't share their faith, right? But because I fought like an animal for their religious liberty, they trusted me. And in that I see the seeds of libertarianism, the true libertarianism, that we can all get along, even if we don't share belief systems. Because liberty, again, the great compromise, right? That we don't have to have the same values, but that we share some base principles, and that we can do as we please, provided we harm no one else. But I feel like that my purpose there is to defy stereotypes and to advance the common cause that the values that I have, and make them not seem so terrifying and scary, and show that people like myself don't want to stamp out their belief systems. We may disagree, but again, that is what I feel like part of my cause is. Because that in 1980s, if you didn't grow up or you didn't live in the 1980s, when the moral majority and the Jerry Falwells and they were trying to stomp out people like myself, right? They was very intolerant towards people like myself. So I know what it's like to be a minority, if not a racial minority. I am definitely a quote unquote religious, non-religious minority, and I know what it's like to be put upon in that sense. But revolutionary to see that happening, and a beautiful thing to have Christians embrace you in such a way. I mean, if I run for office again, I'm going to church, because that's where the people are, and I have I do this out of love for my fellow man. So, if they'll accept me, I'll go. Anyways, so one of my biggest, happiest defining moments, winning over conservatives on the immigration issue. In a year when Donald Trump is saying, build that wall, I'm winning over the hearts and minds of conservatives on the immigration issue, talking about the concept of open borders, talking about liberalizing our immigration laws. And the way that I was able to convince conservatives was to explain to them in economic terms, yes, you can't have open borders in a welfare state, but the problem, of course, there is that if they, was more true in the 1980s than it is today, if you have open borders in a welfare state, it's better that they are illegal, right? Milton Friedman preferred illegal immigration to legal immigration because at the time, at least, on the state level, you didn't qualify for benefits. So if you came here legally, you could get, and you became a citizen, right? You can qualify for benefits. But if you came here illegally, you didn't qualify for benefits. So Friedman, the conservatives like to take his word out of context and say, can't have open borders in a welfare state, which is why illegal immigration is superior in an open borders welfare state situation. However, by explaining to conservatives about how the incentives, the economic incentives are set up, that people are breaking the law, all of a sudden it changes the argument, right? So I'm on Glenn Beck's show, and his buddy Stu, or Pat and Stu, was sitting there, and he goes, I'm concerned about how you talk about immigration because I live on a border state, right? And I see them coming across, and I'm worried about security and stuff. And I said, well, what I fear is the government getting involved with business owners and demanding that the business owners become enforcers of the law. That's wrong. It's wrong to demand that the citizens of the United States should not be tasked with law enforcement. That's not their job. It's not to turn us into policemen and to turn us against one another and have us ratting each other out. That's Gestapo. It's wrong. And so the idea is that if we can convince conservatives, guys, can I convince you, that if we incentivize immigration properly, that we reinstitute something more like an Ellis Island style protocol, which makes everybody smile and happy. I don't know why. Maybe because most of our ancestors came through Ellis Island, right? Maybe because we are the ones reaping the blessings of that policy. Maybe we can return to a more realistic policy. Now, Ellis Island was no joke. Ellis Island had strict security checks. It had strict disease checks. And you had a very tiny hole to get through in a needle, right? You had to thread a very thin, little tiny hole to get into the United States. It was very difficult. So an Ellis Island style protocol is one that I think is much more suited towards the American concepts of liberty. And it incentivizes people to obey the law. And when I talk about it like that, instead of how leftists talk about it, you bigot, you xenophobe, all of a sudden conservatives, when you talk about the business angle, Why should the government tell you who you can or can't hire? Why is that the government's job? Then the conservatives start to change their minds. And so being a more free market in labor libertarian, using those words in that way, little twist in rhetoric, and all of a sudden people's minds change. And people, there's still the alt-right that's going to call me a cuck. But when you stand next to Gary, I look way better. So that's all I got. Questions? Thanks. Yay.
Actually, I got a question. Your name's been floated around as a potential candidate for U.S. Senate in Missouri in 2018. What are your plans?
I am definitely considering exploring the possibility of running.
What about president in 2020?
Oh, Lord, no. Here's the thing. I did it because I thought it was needed. I thought it was necessary. And I don't want to become the perpetual campaigner. I'm so annoyed when people do it just to do it. I think I'd make a great president, but the problem is that elections are all about timing. And if I run for Senate, then maybe I can do some good, right? Maybe I can be effective. Maybe I can join Rand, right, and Lee and Cruz and be able to stand up and say no, give them a little bit of reinforcements. Everybody be supreme leader and all that, but the reason why I ran was because look at Hillary, look at Trump, look at Gary. So I was like, I better do this because otherwise there's just not going to be anybody representing what I truly believe. I ran because I didn't think there was anybody that truly believed what I believe. If there was a better person, I would have supported them, like I did Gary in 2012. If in 2020 there is somebody running who's better, I'll support them. If not, I might, but it takes a toll, man.
Okay.
It does. And you have to look at it as public service because it is. And your personal life's over. It's over. I can't do anything anymore. It's not under observation. Anything you say twisted out of context and things like that. I'm a libertarian. I like my privacy, and it's gone. I kind of miss it. So maybe we'll look at a Senate run in Missouri. We'll see. But I'll make that decision in June. Okay. Yes, sir.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
The one is, I'm assuming you would probably repeal Obamacare if you could. Is that fair to say?
Sure.
So you mentioned Rand Paul's bill, but why would you replace it? Would you replace it with anything, or would you just let the market deal with the replacement?
So Rand's plan was the best of everything we've seen, right? Like what it did was it established health savings accounts, right? And it wasn't perfect. I mean, the problem with that is that people who already can't afford to pay for insurance aren't going to put money into a savings account, right? So I think it was unrealistic in that regards. But I think repeal it. Right? But the problem was that the healthcare system was still having problems before that, right? We need more competition, right? We need more interstate competition. We need to deregulate it, right? Because what we've done is Obamacare was really just corporatism. All it did was it gave handouts to the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical drug companies. That's what Medicare and Medicaid do, right? They just create a guaranteed system of payments for the providers so that they can make a guaranteed amount of cash. And when you start talking about getting rid of that, people get really spiky and they want to fight. Right, so the Obamacare was corporatism. It was actually written by the health insurance lobby, right? The insurance lobby by a woman who worked for the health insurance companies, and she knew that they wanted this bill of needs, and Obamacare did that. And so I think that the problem is we can't even start from square one, right? We talk about square one because the government has created so much moral hazard in the system. There's so much moral hazard that everybody's going to be fighting over like the pieces and the scraps, and meanwhile, right, innovation is lost, right, opportunity is lost. A lot of that has to do with like patents. Rand Paul and Bernie Sanders agreed we should be able to buy drugs from Canada. Like when the libertarians and the socialists agree on something, like stuff, it's going down.
I love it when Bernie accidentally endorses the free market.
I love it when communists accidentally endorse the free market. Right, exactly. I would love to see competition. Not just interstate, but big state. I'd like to see competition amongst different governments.
And then the other one was, what would you have done about TPP? Would you
TPP.
prefer to negotiate one country with another, or just like two or more?
I've held out making a decision about whether or not to support TPP because I try to be as objective as possible. I'm biased as hell, but I'm fair, and I listen to every side of the argument. And I consider myself a free trade guy, pro free trade. And when I listen to the critics, the arguments that the critics made that I think that were most compelling on TPP, not that it's like corporations are taking over, man, but like the arguments from the idea that there were so many different countries that were in this trade deal. It had been so heavily negotiated for so long, for so many ways. I think it was like 5,000 pages or something like that. It would be impossible to conduct diplomacy or for business owners to operate in that kind of environment because all of a sudden, not only would we get free trade in some sense, but we also get regulations in other sense, and the compliance with the TPP would have been the problem. So I think I probably lean more towards the end of getting rid of it, even though I completely agree with like Cato Institute and Reason on the free trade arguments that were involved. We were lowering tariffs in many ways. We need to do that. But I think maybe Trump does have a good point that when we make trade agreements, it needs to be much simpler. It needs to be, bilateral, right? It needs to be between two countries or maybe two or three. But when you've got like 20 different countries in one trade deal, it's a recipe for problems. Yes, sir.
To piggyback on that question, the TPP, the part that bothered me was intellectual property. Do you have an opinion on intellectual property? And do you think the political climate is right for that issue? Are people concerned about copyright?
Right. Yeah, of course. And as someone who is a creative executive who actually creates intellectual content, as someone who holds intellectual property, I'm very concerned about that. Has anybody here ever been involved in the making of a movie? Anybody? Okay. So filmmaking is the kind of project, or like creating software is another, for example, is the kind of project that takes millions of dollars to invest up front. And on the back end of it, when it's done, you have to, you can just copy it and give it away. I think it's a little bit wrong-headed on behalf of some libertarians to say, oh, I'm not stealing this, I'm just copying it and giving it away. It's not theft. Because if I create something like that, I can create a contract and say, if you view this, and I've spent millions to create it, you have to abide by the rules. If you watch this, if you take property of this, you don't own the copyright, you don't own the intellectual property of this. I think that it's probably egregious, the types of copyrights and patents that we have, like, 99 years for many patents? Like, Disney keeps getting Mickey Mouse renewed for, 99-year releases and things like that. And, they've profited, they've certainly made millions of dollars. But, is there some compelling interest in someone else taking Mickey Mouse and having ownership in him? No. But is there a compelling interest in a drug patent or a drug company having an expiration on their patent? Yeah, there is, because we're talking about human lives. So you have to be able to differentiate. I don't think that there's a blanket answer to a question like that. And I want to make sure I get to everybody, so I'll get back to you. Yes, sir.
So I'll preface this by saying that I tend to vote for Democrats, but I tend to agree with you on a lot of stuff, like trade and immigration. But I just want to take issue a little bit with one of the things you said about climate change, because I think that equating the changes in the climate historically, an ice age, which were large changes, but over a large period of time, we're talking about fractions of degrees over thousands of years, that over 1 million years creates a big change. But that, when we talk about 2 degrees, it doesn't sound like a lot, but that's 2 degrees change over the course of 80 to 150 years. Right. And that I think that trying to make that, trying to compare historical change in the climate to this rapid change that is in the climate now can be a little bit harmful, and also increasing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which you're totally right, plants need to function, but too much carbon dioxide is harmful to plants, and things above 4 parts per million, which is about what we're seeing now, tends to be harmful for plants, especially.
Understood. Let me respond to you on the micro level and the macro level. On the micro level, the problem with the climate scientist community is that they do not agree on which models to use. So I think they have something like 13 different models that they use, and none of them can agree which model is the one that is most accurate. And you're making projections, right? Yes, you're using historic data, but the problem is that the scientists are making projections, and the scientists have been consistently wrong on this, right? They have made projections that have proven to be inaccurate. Since the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, we've seen an increasing amount of projections with more and more fear about projections of terror. And at some point, you have to understand that the common people are going to look at that, and you will be discredited because they will see a gloom and doom, end of the world kind of scenario. And especially when the climate community starts saying things like we need to lock up people who dissent. So when you do that, it's discredited. So on the micro level, the problem is that the climate scientists can't agree on which models to use, and their projections in the past have been inaccurate. Now, on the macro level, let's look at it from a real global scale at the real threats that Earth actually faces. Because they gathered a group of climate scientists together in Copenhagen, and they reached this thing that they called the Copenhagen Accord. And what the Copenhagen Accord did was it took 13 different global issues that the world faces and ranked them in order of expedient or desire. Right. So essentially, what they were trying to do was create triage. Does everybody know what triage is? Like if you go into a hospital, for example, and you've got a broken leg, but you've had a heart attack, they're going to fix your heart attack before they fix the broken leg, right? Climate change was like 11 or it was 12 out of 13 of problems that humanity has to face, with the top problems being things like HIV/AIDS, micronutrients, malaria, dengue fever, and things like that. So again, it becomes a pet issue for some people, which I can certainly respect, especially if you're a climate scientist, and I'm going to be more prone to listen to you. And I'm not a scientist, but I'm very pro-science and science-minded, right? But there's too many problems on the micro perspective, and then when we look at things from the macro perspective, we got bigger problems. Yes?
That also doesn't take into consideration the fact that this is going to be an ethics issue in the future. We're basically just condemning all these people in the future because it's not affecting us now. So given that, I agree that that's why it's so hard for climate scientists to convince people about the problem that is climate change, is because it's not seen as a problem now. You still have to consider what it's going to be doing for people in the future. Yeah.
Well, if I told you that Godzilla was going to come out of the ocean at some point, would you believe me? Right. The problem is that it's fear mongering. It is. It's at some point you're trying to scare me, right? Are you a climate scientist?
I mean, I'm a biology major, so yes and no. I don't know.
I mean, here's the thing: if you're not willing everybody's trying to confirm their biases, okay? And I'm guilty of it too. But I know that I do it, and so what I try and do is I listen to people who call me out on my BS, and I'm willing to do that. So, but the problem is that it becomes dogma, right? Is that what I read in the climate blogs is like people like actors like Leonardo DiCaprio are lecturing on climate change, and it's a tad puerile. At some point, credible spokesman other than Bill Nye, who is not a scientist, he was an engineer, right, need to step up and become better communicators. Scientists are not good communicators, right? People didn't believe Galileo, Copernicus, Pythagoras. How many scientists have we burned at the stake, right? Because they're not good communicators, right? And I'm not saying that it's not a possibility. Huh?
Why don't you think this is another Galileo situation? This is.
But you know why? Because it's less. Because I've taken an astronomy class and I can chart the stars, right? The math is there. But the problem with the climate science is that it's not there. Because I'm telling you, with 13 different models and the scientists cannot agree on which model to use, you have a problem. So the scientists aren't even in there is no consensus. The whole 97% consensus is a myth. It's just not there. Yes, sir.
So you've spoken a lot about your opposition to fear-based tactics, and we can all get behind that. But surely rejecting every fear-based tactic is as unwise as allowing ourselves to be influenced by every fear-based tactic, right? So what would it take to convince you that for example, something like climate change, what would it take to convince you that there's a legitimate, credible threat there? Like, yes, there are fear-based tactics being used, but what would it take to convince you that there's also a legitimate, credible threat behind?
Double-blind testing, right? So verifiable testing that people agree on. Here's the thing: vaccines, perfect example, right? That's the kind of thing where you can do double-blind testing on it. I just pissed off all my anti-vax people, but I'm pro-vaccine, and that's because that's readily testable. Now, climate science is the kind of thing that requires a lot of money, so it's not the kind of thing that the laymen can generally get their hands on. As a big believer in science, theory of disease and other things and stuff like that. Yes?
I have a question about gun violence. How do you reconcile your views that guns make us safer with the facts? For example, that reputable studies show that having a gun in a home makes a person massively more likely to die from a homicide or suicide, more likely than someone they know than someone like a random homicide.
Well, so there's micro and macro. There's philosophical here, and then there's practical. From a philosophical perspective, there is no tragedy, no matter how great. So, no, you don't have a right because this guy goes out and turns into a school shooter. So the concept of individual rights is that you have certain intrinsic, doesn't mean that we go and we wiretap everyone in the United States. Okay, so that's the philosophical question. But, if you have a way to, right, a gun is a tool. The problem with danger, right, and threats is that we get a view of the types of dangers that will happen to us, right? And sometimes, us Second Amendment fans, we love to, fantasize about not going out in a blaze of glory, but, taking out a home robber, okay? The problem is that, yes, there's the individual rights problem, but number two, that could possibly, because that is what it would require ultimately. Because I guarantee you, it only disarms people who are good people, because bad people are going to break the law. The statistical argument on people, the reason why it's not compelling.
One thing you talked about before is letters of marque and reprisal. Can you explain?
Sale, yeah. So, a letter of marque and reprisal is it is Article 1, and this has not been used since the War of 1812. Owned a blimp over fathers. They feared giving too much power to an executive branch. Right? The power to declare war is in Congress. But Congress also has another authority. If they don't want to declare war on ISIS, and believe me, the Congress does not want to declare war on ISIS. And one of the reasons why, which is a legitimate reason, is because they don't want to grant them the legitimacy of statehood. Right? Many of these terrorists are not actors. They're not state-based actors. So how do you deal with what we now call enemy combatants? And how do you do it that respects constitutional due process? Because I'll tell you right now, what we have is an executive branch with a kill list. We have extrajudicial assassinations. If you're in a country overseas, if you're in Yemen, 16-year-old Anwar al-Awlaki. That comes to fighting terrorism, I push the idea that the United States Congress should consider revisiting letters of marque to congressmen about that, or when you talk to people in power. They don't like that. They're like, oh, that's just, it's distasteful. We don't like this idea. Why? You're already doing it. Well, because we love the Navy SEALs, man. This is America. We're sending the SEALs, bro. Okay, yeah, the SEALs did a great job killing Osama bin Laden. To have terrorist groups like ISIS, porcupines have. That's what libertarianism means. Letters of marque are a constitutional method for us to consider fighting piracy and fighting terrorists. Now, here's the truth, and libertarians like to not talk about the things that don't confirm their biases, but here, since I'm trying to be honest with you, intellectually honest with you, I'll tell you this. During the days of fighting sail, during the Tripolitan Wars, from the hulls of Montezuma to Tripoli, the Marines were founded for this kind of warfare. During the Tripolitan Wars, the Barbary Wars, our most libertarian president, Thomas Jefferson, right, who actually was not our most libertarian president, that would probably go to Grover Cleveland or Calvin Coolidge. Thomas Jefferson built up the Navy to fight the Corsairs because he knew that he needed more than just the mercenaries. The Hessians had been used on us during our Revolutionary War, but it was actually the letters of marque. It was actually the privateers that won the American War of Independence, not just George Washington, because the United States Continental Navy was something like 6 ships during the American Revolution. I can see I'm boring you guys with this history lesson, but I'll get off of it in a second. I just love this stuff. And I just finished a really great book about the Tripolitan Wars, the Barbary Wars. Brutal Muslim terrorists of their day. And Jefferson dealt with them harshly, not just with a navy, not just with the Marines who marched to Dern from Alexandria, but with liberals don't like that. But hey, it's the same thing from a different name. Government is inherently inefficient. Some things the private killing terrorists and pirates. Anyways, how are we doing on time, my friend Gilbert?
We've got about 10 minutes left.
10 minutes. Ooh. All right. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So you have talked a lot about evaluating empirical facts and arguments for your positions. You also believe in intrinsic natural rights.
Yeah.
So where do you derive your idea of natural rights?
Yeah. We hold these truths to be self-evident, right?
Okay.
So
like an X in the equation that you're talking about?
No, I mean the concept is that here's the thing. So the theological view on this is one of a unitary position from which they derive their concept of rights. But the secular position that is in accordance with natural law, I think, relies much more on triangulation. So the moralist viewpoint from the non-secular position is taking a single data point and saying, from God we derive our concept of rights. But my position is one of triangulation, using logic and multiple data points. Okay? So does this empirically lead to the flourishing of society? That is a utilitarian argument, right? So I think that the problem is that that if you are utopian, right? You're going to have your foot in the extremes of one of the other camps. You say you have to be this or you have to be that because it relies on a utopian framework. And I think that the world, the true world is much more fuzzy. So that in order for us to really discover the truth, which we may never discover, although we head towards it, is to use triangulation. So I take 3 data points, right, of truth, of basic truth. Don't murder babies. Don't sell heroin to babies. Don't starve babies to death. And in this is the truth, right? Don't kill the babies. And we do that by relying on multiple data points, empirical data, in order to derive what I believe is a moral truth. So that's the best explanation that I can come up with for something like that. It's not an easy question, and there's no easy answers. That's the best that I can do.
Yeah, we can probably take one more question.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Why do you think there are so few minorities and women in the Libertarian Party? Do you think that's a challenge for the Libertarian Party, or do you think that's a problem at all?
Sure, but here's the problem. I've made big mistakes in my life by using identity politics to perform a task that I had been sold a bill of goods on diversity, which is that diversity itself is inherently good. When you're talking about things like genetics, absolutely scientifically proven that diversity is a good thing. The farther you spread out your genes, the healthier your kids will be. But when it comes to diversity in the workplace, for example, hiring someone because they are a woman or because they are a Muslim or because they are black is a disastrous, horrible, bad idea. And I've learned that because I've done that kind of decision making. And rather than hire that person based on their merits or their skill for the job, you hire someone not based on their merits or their skill or job, but for superficial reasons, which I actually think is worse because I think it is a demerit to that person. And so when it comes to diversity for diversity's sake, no. Diversity in the gene pool, yes.
This isn't an issue of merit necessarily. It's a matter of do minorities align their views with the Libertarian Party, right?
Right.
I just want to point out that the Conservative Society Exec Board is by far the most racially diverse exec board compared to the Democrats and the Communists.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, hold on. Yeah, no, you're right. And of course, if you looked at the Republican and the Democratic primaries, it was all white people who were running for the Democratic nomination, and then the Republican Party had Cruz, Rubio, Ben Carson, Carly.
So look at the voters, right?
Okay. Here's the problem, and this is the thing. Or probably incorrect for a minute. Do we need women and minorities for window dressing? Is the point that we have is that we need to have more people in so that we can virtue signal? Is that what it is? Is that what you really want? Is that I need to come up here and show you how moral and virtuous I am by getting a token black guy? That's tokenism. No, that's not what we need to be doing. Because it's all PR. It's all marketing. And it's lies. And I think as a matter of fact, I think it's actually kind of racist and sexist in a way. Because it's like, we're going to give you this position. Not because you're good enough, but because of the way that you were born. Which I think really goes against liberal values. Classical liberal here. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thank you. Woo! Ending.